Hello, how's it going? Welcome back. This is a Tamiya TL-01 and it is brand new. It has never been driven. And there's a split there that's been re-glued. I don't remember doing that. Or is it just a bad mould? I don't know. This is my first ever RC car. Except it's not. I'm going to take you down a bit of a trip down memory lane today. Talking about one of these. But starting with something else. Now there will be a running theme throughout this video, and that is, I didn't know. You'll see, I didn't know a lot of things back in the day. Still don't know a lot of things. This is my first ever RC car. Except it isn't. This is a Teo heads-up hopper. I got this one fairly recently, in the last few years, as a bit of a trip down memory lane, a bit of a nostalgia trip, because it was one of these that was my first RC car. It was great. It was really quick, you know, for what was available back in the sort of, I would imagine, mid to late 90s, probably mid 90s. It has a selectable high and low speed. I always was confused by this because the low was faster. But what it was, you know, I didn't know anything. Again, I didn't know. It was simply gearing, and it couldn't pull the higher gearing as well as it could pull the lower gearing. So the top speed was higher in the fast mode, but the acceleration was much poorer. So it felt quicker on the slower mode, and that's why I drove it in most of the time. It is a toy grade RC, of course, 9.6 volt battery that you put in the bottom here. No differential. Fairly standard sort of 1980s, 1990s toy grade RC car. I didn't know what toy grade was, of course. I just knew it was an RC car. Now, I can't remember how I went from this to the TL-01. You'd think it was the natural progression of toy grade to hobby grade. But I didn't know what a toy grade was or a hobby grade was. I had no concept of these things. I remember going through the BT's catalogue. Now, BT's, I miss BT's so much. BT's was the best shop in the world. It was boy heaven. RC cars, Meccano, Lego, Connects, double O gauge railways, N gauge railways. There was some Nintendo stuff in there. All sorts of hobbies, tangible hobbies you build and create and stuff like that. It was great. It's gone. Anyway, in BT's, I was going through the catalogue because Christmas was coming up, or birthday, pretty sure it was Christmas, and I wanted an RC car. Now this is why I don't think I went straight from this to the TL-01, because I was looking at what I now know to be a toy grade RC car in the BT's catalogue. I believe it was called the Psycho. I did look it up online. It might have been like the Nico or Teo Psycho or something. I remember it being blue with big back wheels. I thought it looked really cool. But one of my friends at school said it looked like a wheelchair. My dad obviously did know between a hobby and a toy grade, because he said that the cars that you build yourself are much faster. This was his words. Because back in the day, hobby grade stuff was generally not ready to run. It was generally kits. Now here's the thing, I wouldn't have been looking at this Psycho, I believe it was called, toy grade RC car if I still had this. I must have fallen off the hobby. I mean, I say fallen off, I mean I only had the one. I must have given up on it at some point, gotten bored of it, and gave away this, or my original one, because it wouldn't have been binned. My family's not that sort of family where we just bin stuff we're bored of. My dad's certainly not that sort of man. I don't think it's still up in their loft. I'm like 99% sure it isn't. So it must have been sold, car boot sale, given away, something. Yellow Pages, remember the Yellow Pages? Maybe it was in that. But anyway, that was gone. So I know it must have been a few years lapse, because I wouldn't have been asking for an RC car again shortly after getting rid of this one. And my parents wouldn't have been too impressed for me asking for one shortly after getting rid of this one. So it must have been a bit of a gap, a few years. But I was looking at a toy grade again. So I didn't go straight from this to TL-01. There was something in between where I was looking. So I was in BT's with my friends, and I mentioned, my dad says, the ones you build are faster. The guy behind the counter heard me and he says, yes, they are. They're much better. So I took the catalogue. I don't know if it was the same catalogue, but I took a catalogue home and I was going through it. And then I was looking at the Tamiyas. Maybe they weren't all Tamiyas, maybe they were Kyoshi's as well, but I specifically remember seeing the Toyota Corolla WRC car with the Castrol livery. And just thinking about making this video, that must be the reason. I only twigged when I was sort of looking up this video. That must be the reason why I'm such a fan of the Castrol livery. I mean, Actually, this was a lot better. Part of my wedding groomsmen gift set, we all got a oil can mug. I got the Castrol one for myself. This used to be a lot better. It's completely faded. I should stop putting it in the dishwasher and get a new one. Anyway, so I asked for a Toyota Corolla for my Christmas present. And my dad went into BT's. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but it turns out that was likely the TA-03 FS chassis. The picture was just the body shell. I just liked the Corolla. Unfortunately for me at the time, the Corolla was sold out in the BT's in Perth where I grew up. So the options were, I believe, a Ford Focus. So my dad came home and said, or maybe a Peugeot. I'm pretty sure it was a Ford Focus. So he said to me, there's two that they have available. They have a Ford Focus and they have an Alfa Romeo 155. And I'm quoting here. They have an Alfa Romeo 155 and it's beautiful. So I went with my dad's judgment. I didn't know what an Alfa Romeo was really. I'm sure I'd heard the phrase before. I'm sure I had, but I don't remember. But anyway, so I said, yeah, okay, I'll go with him. Let's get the Alfa Romeo 155. So that was my first hobby grade, even though I didn't know that was a thing. I just knew it as one you built yourself RC car. And so several years ago, I found one of these on eBay, I think, for sale. It was actually in the States. The body shell had been painted, cut out, mostly stickered up. But the chassis itself was still in pieces. It hadn't been built. It was an unbuilt kit. And the body shell, this is very dusty. The body shell was this Bosch Alfa Romeo 155 V6 Ti. My first hobby grade RC. Except not this one, obviously. This is one I bought relatively recently from the States, as I said. The one that I got for my Christmas from BT's that my dad built for me over the weeks following is not this one. This is, again, another bit like this. A trip down memory lane, bit of nostalgia. I got this a few years ago and I've never driven it. The TL-01 chassis. This one isn't standard. It's running, well, obviously it's got 2.4 GHz radio system. It's running a GT tuned motor, whereas it came with the standard silver can, we call it, standard Tamiya motor. This has an electronic speed controller. This happens to be a Hobbywing 1060, but these came with a mechanical speed controller with a wiper arm. If you don't know what that is, you had a servo that operated an arm, just like you have for your steering servo. It was literally a steering servo. Operated this arm with a resistor, and as the arm went back and forward. And it had, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 speed settings. It was like nothing, half full, or maybe 2/3 full, something like that. So it wasn't progressive. It was or like that, or whatever it was. It was not progressive. The ESC was a good upgrade for it. It had friction dampers, not real oil-filled shocks. This one has oil-filled shocks. I believe these are Ansman ones. I can't remember. This one has oil-filled shocks. Very stiff, actually. They're too stiff, but whatever. Didn't have adjustable links. This one has some adjustable links. It's the rear. Sorry, that's the front toe. Does it have adjustable camber as well? Yes, it does. These are all fixed on a standard car. Spec-wise, these are not good. This one's been upgraded. It's got ball bearings throughout. It's got the oil shocks. Got the adjustable links. But as standard, it had friction shocks, pogo sticks, no adjustability on any of the suspension, bushings throughout. It sat a bit higher than this as standard. You've got the drive shaft, the central prop shaft running on this edge at the top of the chassis. It's a sort of brick, as you see, it's a narrow brick with the battery that goes in that way. This is rounded, so it's for old nickel metal hydrides and old NiCad packs. But you can get a LiPo the right shape, which I have. Spec-wise and dynamically, these are not great at all. I mean, this is sitting slightly lower than a standard one, as I said, but even still, if you're downstairs with your TL-01, the centre of gravity is somewhere in the floor above. The battery goes across that way, transversely, hangs out the side of the chassis, wobbling around. Yeah, the drive shaft is not central at all, as you can see. It's along one side. You had the mechanical wiper arm speed controller, you had the pogo sticks, you had non-adjustability, pretty poor tyres with no foams. But it didn't matter, because back in the day, it was the bee's knees. This came out in 1997. Now, if you'd asked me, I would have thought I got this car during the sort of mid to late 90s. That's obviously not the case, because this came out in 97, and I had a friend of mine. Well, first of all, this came out in 97. The Corolla I originally asked for came out in 98. And I had a friend of mine who we used to race around on the street, who got an RC car either just after me or around about the same sort of time. He had a Kyosho, what was it called? Pure 10 Alfa EP. And I remember him having, I believe it came with a Subaru body shell. And then pretty sure he got a Tommy Mackinnon shell and also a British Touring Cars Mondeo, Rapid Fit Mondeo. He had the Pure 10 Alpha EP, the Kyosho, and we used to race around with each other, and that came out in 99, so it must have been early 2000s, which surprises me. But then, you know, in 97 I was 10. I do remember racing these around in the sort of early, the first year of high school or something, so maybe 2000, where I would have been 13. Yeah, about right. I must have got this, must have been really new on the scene, especially his Kyosho when we first got these. And I remember thinking that the Tamiya, this one, my one, was the bee's knees, because it was quicker than the Kyosho. Even though the Tamiya silver can motor is really not quick at all, especially by modern standards, and it was running a NiCad battery, had the 1400 silver NiCads, which had a lot of punch for what they were back in the day. It was faster than the Kyosho. I think there's a lot more internal friction with this than the Kyosho, because the Kyosho was belt drive. This is obviously shaft drive. This has got big gears, very crude. It's a bit of a crude design, actually, this whole car. And it screamed its nuts off. And I don't mean high RPM screaming. I mean loud, friction-y noise. The Kyosho was much quieter. So I reckon it purely came down to this motor, or the silver can that was in it. And it was just more powerful than the Kyosho motor, because I'm convinced this has a much higher friction. I don't think I ever did get oil-filled shocks on my original TL-01, but I did get an electronic speed controller, and I did get ball bearings. Did I get ball bearings? I think I did. I'm not sure. My dad said I'd get a lot more control out of an ESC, when theoretically that's true, because you have completely linear progressive throttle on an ESC, which you don't get with a mechanical speed controller. However, it was at full speed everywhere. I had it pinned everywhere on the street, just flinging it around at full speed, so it never actually felt any different to me at the time. If I driving it around a track or something, you would definitely feel the difference. My original Alfa Romeo body shell eventually got trashed. Of course it did. I was young and I was driving an RC car on the street. But also, I had this. It seems so stupid thinking back to it. I thought it had this handy feature, automatic rundown of the battery feature. It would run the battery flat when you switched it off. Didn't think about it because I didn't know any better, because of course I didn't. If you have the throttle on full and then you switch the car off, the servo operating the servo arm mechanical speed controller, you close the circuit, so the power is going through, maximum power from the battery to the motor. If I switch it off, all that means is the servo can't reset back to the center again. So the circuit stays closed, the battery stays closed, the circuit with the battery stays closed. So it was, you'd switch the car off and it continued at full speed until you unplug the battery or switch it back on, and then the servo would center again, and then it would shut the power off. I thought that was a feature, but it obviously wasn't. It was just the mechanical speed controller stuck on. What made that worse is I used to have this issue with this having full speed runaways all the time. Very regularly we get a full speed runaway, which hence the main reason why the body shell was trashed. It would take off at full speed, you'd have no steering, and you just had to chase after it until it hit something. And what was happening? and I should have put these two things together, but I didn't know any better. Like I said, recurring theme, I didn't know, and it seems so obvious. The switch, I've got the switch mounted up here for my speed controller, for my ESC, but the switch that came with this, when you had the Tamiya mechanical speed controller, was much bigger than that, twice as big, and it was hanging down somewhere underneath. Can't remember where it was now exactly. Probably there, probably from these two screw holes, hanging down. And off was backwards, on was forwards. Now that's key, because what was happening is stones were hitting this and switching it off while it was driving around, when, you know, you're rattling over the road. Stones would switch it off and it'd be switched off at full speed. And of course, mechanical speed controller with the arm was locked on full, and you would have full speed and have a runaway. I didn't put those two things together. What a tube, eh? What a tube. So from then on, you know, now that I've realised it, getting older, even with ESCs, if there's a Tamiya switch on the underneath bolted to it, if I use the original mounting location, I'll flip it round so that off is backwards. Sorry, the off is forward and on is backwards, because all the stones can then do is switch it more on, and it's either on or off, so that doesn't matter. Yes, a bit daft. Anyway, after the Alfa Romeo body shell got trashed, I got an Audi A4 body shell in silver. It looked good. Not as good as the Alfa necessarily, but it looked good. And that's what it looked like when I sold it, because I replaced this with an HPI Sprint, which is a better car dynamically. You know, it's lighter, lower centre of gravity, way less friction, ball bearings throughout, oil-filled shocks. I gave it adjustable suspension. You run circles around this thing. But anyway, this is about the TL-01, not the HPI Sprint. So, you know, you see a lot of movement in a lot of slop and movement in a lot of parts in a TL-01. In a nutshell, high centre of gravity, battery hanging at the sides, non-adjustable, heavy. I mean, it is really heavy for a touring car. Not the greatest spec in the world, not the best handling car in the world, even though it does have independent suspension all round. So definitely not the best car, the best touring car ever made. Definitely not. Except it kind of is, because it's what, I mean, look what this car has led to. The TL-01 is a stepping stone into the proper RC hobby, the hobby grade RC hobby. And it has been for so many people. How many of you watching wouldn't be the person you are now, and wouldn't have the hobby, the RC hobby which you love now, if it wasn't for a Tamiya TL-01? Because it was your first step into that world. And of course there's other ones as well, you know, TA-01, TA-02, maybe you were slightly earlier than me in you know, early 90s, which when they were the hot new thing. But I suppose this applies to all entry-level kit touring car Tamiyas, especially Tamiyas. I mean, Kyoshos as well. But they're all so fondly remembered by people because they were all the first starting blocks for what became a way of life for people. And yeah, this is not a brilliant RC car. look how much you can go left and right without the wheels moving. Nobody can see that. It's got about 5 mil of movement left and right with the wheels on the ground. Just the amount of slop and everything. Very crude design. It's a brick with two sides shoved together. The way that the gears, the diff gears centralise, they're free floating in there. They're centralised by the outdrives going through the bearings, well, bushings when it's new, but the bearings on this one, in each side, which holds it all together, which holds it in line. It's very crude. It's very simple. It's very basic. It's poor performing compared to, you know, and I'm not just talking about the brushless power system, I'm talking about dynamics, the chassis, design, etc. It's poor performing compared to a modern car, but I have more fondness for this than I do for many other RC cars that I've owned. I had a Arma Vortex, which can do 65 miles an hour out of the box, and I didn't gel with it. I didn't particularly like it. I found it quite uninspiring and dull and uninteresting. I really like this. Some of my very fondest memories in RC are blasting one of these things around the street against my friend with the Kyosho Pure 10 Alfa. And there was another guy with, it was either a TA-01 or a TA-02, I don't know. And there was another guy who cheated. He had an HPI Sprint, that's cheating. And it was so simple. It was a simpler time. You didn't need the latest and greatest. You didn't need massive power, massive RPMs. You didn't need loads of brushless power and many cells to your battery. You needed a NiCad, a 540 brushed motor, 27 turn, and a bunch of friends. That's all you needed. And it was great fun. And I think the legacy a car like this has left on me, I can't be overstated. And that's why the TL-01 is possibly the greatest RC car of all time. Or the TA-01, or the TA-02, or the Kyosho Pure 10 Alpha, whatever introduced you to the hobby. It helped you learn. It helped you figure out how these things work. It helps you meet people. It helps you make memories with people. So is this the greatest RC car of all time? No, not even slightly. In fact, I have better touring cars on these shelves. That's my Tamiya TT-01, heavily modified. I mean, you could argue which one's better out of the box. I mean, the TT-01 is better because just like this Kyosho Pure 10 Alpha was better than this, they're both lower bathtub style chassis with much lower center of gravity, so they handle better. But I have seen people argue that this is better than TT-01. TT-01 is better than this dynamically, even though there's a lot of issues with TT-01. That one is heavily modified and it's really good now. So that's a better touring car. That Yokomo MR4 TC Custom is a better touring car. Now from the top shelf, I've got two losses, a XXS and a JRXS Type R. And they are both miles better than, like, universes better than this. But they wouldn't be here if it wasn't for this car. I think a lot of people could say that about their RC collection, whether you own a really high-end rock crawler or a massive monster truck or a speed car that does 100+ miles an hour or whatever. None of them would be there if it wasn't for your first Tamiya or your first Kyosho or whatever it was. I think more people owned the first Tamiya than a first Kyosho. Confidently say that. I think the TL-01 is one of the most popular ones ever, just like the TA-01 and TA-02. And that sort of does make them the best touring cars of all time, or the best RC cars of all time, because this hobby needs new people. The people stuck around because of the memories that they had from one of these, or similar. Oh, jeez. The slop in that. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because I loved my TL-01, my original one. I've never driven this one, so I don't really have much affection for it, really, but I still like it. And it is the essence of what an RC car is. And it takes us back to a time where things were simpler, you know, where things were, you were more innocent, the world didn't seem as mental as it is now. It might have been, but we didn't know about it. How many of you, let us know in the comments, started off your RC journey with a TL-01 or something similar? Let us know. And why you think these could well be the greatest RC cars of all time, or why you think I'm talking nonsense and they're not even remotely the best RC cars of all time because they're dynamically terrible, which they are. Even this one with its ball bearings and its oil-filled shocks and its adjustable suspension is not particularly good. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Anyway, that's it. Take care of yourselves and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.